Hi everybody, it's Laura. Thank you so much for joining me on my channel. Today I have a layout that I made using the September Shimmerz Paints Color Kitz collection. When I made this layout, I was away at a crop and I didn't have dies with me. I might have had one or two, but I didn't have any shape dies. But luckily, my friend Sue had a really beautiful set of nesting hexagon dies. So I was thinking that since she had so many different sizes that I would use different sizes on my layout. So I used her dies and I cut out a whole bunch of white cardstock in 3 different sizes of hexagons, and then I did the same thing with the pattern paper from the Shimmerz Paints kit. Whenever I have shapes on my layouts, I really like them to have at least a little bit of dimension. In the past, I have made shapes that have lots and lots of layers, and sometimes it really makes the layout extremely heavy. So I decided that I was going to use the same approach, but maybe not have quite so many layers. So I cut out 2 pieces of white cardstock for every pattern paper hexagon that I cut out. And those 3 pieces together added a little bit of dimension, but nothing that made my layout extremely heavy. So I used 4 different pattern papers. You can see there's pink, yellow, blue, and brown. And then after I had used some ATG adhesive to attach those 3 layers together, I inked the edges with Distress ink in Vintage Photo. So now I'm going to be working on the hexagons that are going to have my photos on them. So I cut out some hexagons, 2 as a matter of fact, in white, in a larger size, and then I attached both of my photos down to 2 layers of hexagons. And then I wanted the hexagons to have a little bit of a mat or a border. So as I said, there were lots of dies in that set of hexagons, so I was able to find a slightly larger hexagon die, and I used that to make a mat for the photo. And all of the cardstock that I'm using is 120-pound smooth white cardstock. I didn't want to leave the mats white, and I was thinking by looking at the photos that earth tones would be a good choice for these mats, so I used 2 different paints that were included in the September kit. I used first the Fire and Spice Vibez, but then I was thinking that I wanted the color to be a little bit darker. So I decided to use the brand new color for this month. I'm going to say it very slowly so I get it right. It's called Espress Yo Self. And because it's a Shimmerz, it has a lot of beautiful shimmer to it. So I really liked that color. And so I used that on both of the mats. Actually, I used both of the colors on both of the mats. But I really, really fell in love with the Shimmerz color because, like I said, I really love the shimmery finish that it has. And then once the paint had dried on the mats, I used the Distress ink once again in Vintage Photo, and I inked the edges of both of the mats. So the photos that I'm using are of my older daughter, Danielle. We went to Lancaster, Pennsylvania. This was from a long time ago, 2015, and we went to an alpaca farm. And we really had a great time. The man who gave us a tour was one of the owners of the farm, and he just really seemed to love the animals. And he was also extremely funny. And I was laughing to myself thinking the other day how there was no charge for the tour, but he spent so much time with us and we had so much fun that my husband gave him a tip. And I think back to how much money he gave him, and at the time, I thought it was a perfectly fine amount to give somebody, but in today's standards, I'm thinking like, wow, it's amazing how little money is worth anymore. And I remember so clearly how when my husband gave him the tip, first he refused it, and then he was just so kind and grateful. I think that was part of the experience. He just seemed like he was an incredibly nice person. And as a result, he made an alpaca farm an amazing experience. I feel like we've gone to a lot of places like that, and that experience, that just really stood out. It was really fun, and we really love the alpacas. They are very sweet animals. So you can see that I have all of my hexagons arranged around my 2 photos. And now I'm using a pencil to just mark approximately where I'm going to put the mixed media in the background. Sometimes I think that I don't need the pencil marks, but I really do. So I always add them. And I didn't put the hexagons back exactly in the same spots where I have them right now. I feel like there was a little bit of shifting, but overall, they stayed in basically the same spot. And I took a picture with my phone to remind me of where everything was placed. Those pencil lines definitely aren't enough. And now I'm using one of the colors from the September kit. It's called Sweetheart Vibez. And I'm using a piece of bubble wrap and I'm squishing the paint down all around the outside of where I drew my lines. So my plan is to leave some spaces in between the hexagons. In the end, most of them overlap with each other, so there really aren't a lot of lines that show the background. But I'd rather add extra paint now than have to go back after I'm all done with a mixed media background or after I've already placed the shapes on top of the background. So I decided to just add some pink all over and just cover my bases. So I started off with kind of an outline going around where I have those pencil lines drawn, and then I slowly work my way into the center. I know that in the middle, I'm going to have my photo, so I didn't worry too much about putting a lot of color there. And I was thinking of just adding pink to the background, but then I was thinking maybe I should just add a touch of yellow. Yellow and pink are a good combination. The yellow just made the pink a little bit orangey in places, and I thought that was a cool effect. So I use another color from the kit. It's called Mind Your Bees-ness, and it's a Twinklingz. So those are the ones that come in the little pans. You could see it off to the right, and you have to spray some water on there, and the color is pretty nice and intense. So I didn't have to add very much of it. You could see that I even sprayed some water on it just to help the color move around the background. I think that on this background, you could really see how the second application of pink made the color so much more intense. You can really bump up the intenseness of your colors by adding multiple layers and drying in between. So I love adding splatters, so I'm adding lots of splatters to not only the background where all the color is, but also all around the edge. I love to have lots of splatters there too. If you want your splatters to really show up, you have to just make sure that the background is completely dry before you add them. That way they don't just kind of mix in with the color that's already there. So once again, the background is completely dry, and now I'm adding some modeling paste. I'm using a Crafter's Workshop stencil. I really like this stencil. It's the first time that I used it. I really like the pattern that it makes. And as I was adding the stenciling to the background, I was thinking I don't want there to be stenciling on every last bit of the background. I wanted some areas that didn't have any stenciling, so there'd be a little difference. I didn't want the whole thing covered with it. However, in the end, once I put those hexagons back on, the only thing that's showing is the area that I added the modeling paste to. But it ended up looking fine. But that was what I had in my mind. I wanted there to be some areas that didn't have the stenciling, but in the end, they all do. There are many different tools that people use to spread modeling paste. There are a lot of different types of palette knives. I have some plastic ones. I also have a silicone kind of paddle, almost like something that you would use to spread frosting on cakes. But my favorite way to spread the modeling paste is with a metal spatula. I bought a set of those right before Tuesday morning closed. That was a long time ago, and I've been using those ever since. I really like the way they're flexible. I don't think the plastic ones are super flexible, but you really can use pretty much anything, but these are my favorite. And here you can see that I use the picture on my phone to reconstruct my arrangement of hexagons. And then I used ATG adhesive to attach them all down, but that didn't end up being strong enough at all. So I decided to just go right to the glue and just commit to wherever I placed down these shapes. And it turned out to be fine. I didn't have any regrets later on, like I usually do when I glue things down early in the process. I did, however, spend a lot of time making little micro adjustments to the placement of all of the shapes. I really wanted to make sure that they were going to look good since I was gluing them down. So I put glue on them, and then I spent a really long time just kind of moving them a little tiny bit. And then also in some spots you could see the pencil lines. So I knew that if I could see the pencil lines, I had the hexagon in the wrong spot. So it took a lot of finessing, but I eventually got it to look the way I wanted it to look. And then it was all glued down. I didn't have to worry about anything falling off of my layout. So as I mentioned earlier, these shapes do have a little bit of height to them. And then I layered some of them on top of others, so that gave them even more height. So I added some foam to that central area. That way, when I rest my photos on them, they have a nice solid base and they won't fall through or fall off. I usually reserve my white foam for when I am popping something up on my layout that's rather thin. And I'll use that when I don't want to risk being able to see the color of the foam from the side because whatever I'm popping up is very thin. But I'm guessing here that I didn't have a whole lot of foam with me. And I guess I could have purchased or borrowed a few foam dots, but then the fun foam has so much surface area, so I knew that would be a really good base for these photos. So it was worth the sacrifice of the white foam to make sure that my pictures were correctly supported. I can always buy some more white foam. I usually buy the foam in the variety packs. I get it in the kids section. I used to get it in Michael's. During COVID, I ran out of fun foam and I had to buy it from Amazon, and it was so much more expensive than Michael's. So I did a major stock up when I was able to get back into Michael's. So I've been using that foam ever since. I was also able to pick up a little bit of the foam that's self-adhesive on one side secondhand. I often go to a thrift store that has a lot of crafting supplies in it, or I should say all crafting supplies in it. And so they have things like that there. Every once in a while, I have to keep my eye open for them. So a friend of mine gave me this little bow, and it matches so nicely with the pink in the flowers that I'm adding to the layout now. So I decided to include that on this layout. I use a number of the die cuts. They're all flower die cuts. And now I'm using some of the puffy stickers. And look at this beautiful sheet of stickers. It's all butterflies and rainbows and dots, all of the embellishments that I just love to use on my pages. This is one of the things I love about using hexagons. I feel like you could just kind of layer in embellishments among the hexagons, and I feel like it just creates a nice look that always seems to work out okay. There were a couple of little flowers on the sticker sheet, so I'm using a lot of those on the page. I'm also using the beautiful butterflies. They were different colors and different sizes, and I always like that on layouts. I think that it's nice to have a variety, especially of sizes of similar embellishments. So as I said, I added a number of die cut flowers from the ephemera pack that comes in the kit. And then after I added them, I decided that I wanted to remove the white border. I felt like they would look a little bit better if they had an inked edge. So that was easy enough to fix. I just got out my little detail scissors and I began trimming around the edge of each of the flowers. And then I inked them up with the ink and put them right back where I had them. I think that that white edge would have looked really nice if I had layered the flowers on top of that dark brown pattern paper. But since I layered them on top of a lot of the pattern papers that already had white in them and they were lighter colors, it was better to get rid of that white border and darken up the edge for some contrast. Every month in the Shimmerz kits, there are several things that are always included or seem to always be included. There are beautiful pattern papers that have a thick quality to them and they have like a laminated finish. There are also die cuts each month. There are cut files that go with each month's kit. And they're also dots. Dots are small, round epoxy embellishments that I absolutely love. I didn't use any on this layout because they didn't go with my theme, but I usually use them on every Shimmerz layout that I bake. This is an exception. And then there are some things that change, and these puffy stickers, these are something that we've been getting lately. I absolutely love them. They're just so beautiful, and I love the way they're shiny. They just add another nice material or texture to the layout. And I really love using butterflies on my pages, so I was really thrilled that this month there were tons of butterflies. And I'm using some glossy accents to help stick those down to the page. These are stickers and they do stick, but I always like to reinforce them with a little bit of glossy accents. Oh, I have an assortment of letters that I bring with me all the time. For this layout, I thought that the brown letters off to the right and these yellow letters were the best matches. but I prefer the yellow letters because I like the font better, and I think it goes a little bit better with this subject. That kind of script font, it just doesn't capture hugging alpacas for some reason. So I decided to go with these yellow letters because not only did I like the font, but I also thought that the yellow matched really well with the yellow in the pattern papers that I used. And finally, these letters are made of paper. They were very easy to ink with the Distress ink in Vintage Photo. So I thought that inking the edges just helped the letters go along with everything else on the page. And then I added a little rainbow right on top of my title. And I kind of fixed up that title off camera. I glued it down and made sure it was lined up. And the layout is complete. And here are a couple of close-ups. Don't forget, when you place your order with Shimmerz Paints, use my name in the comments and you'll receive a free paint. I always forget to say that until the end, but it's definitely a nice way to get a free gift. In the description box, there's a link to the Shimmerz shop and a link to this month's Color Kitz collection. I hope you enjoyed this video and I hope you have a fantastic day. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.